absolutely loved A Quiet Place 2, which is now released digitally, and to celebrate that, Paramount asked me to break down a few scenes from the film. And of course, I jumped at that because, like I said on Letterboxd when I first saw the film, John Krasinski handles the tension masterfully. He employs such a smart and simple use of the camera and blocking and sound. It's all just massively effective for me. It's also helpful that they went as practical as possible.
If you do everything practically, it feels a lot more real, a lot more intense than as soon as you put CGI in. As much as, you know, the creatures and everything are so incredible, we always had practical elements going on around the creatures.
When we had our creature interacting with water or with anything in the scene, we'd have somebody, a proxy person, go through and knock things off the wall or jump in the water and give us splashes of where the creature was.
Solid warning here. If you don't want spoilers, go watch the film, then come back because spoilers. This moment I want to look at is a specific point in the opening of the film, which the entire opening is excellent. Once we get into the thick of it, Krasinski cuts very little and lets it live in Oners, which sometimes can feel gimmicky if it's not done for the right scene, but this was absolutely the right choice. It locks you in step with the characters as the moments unfold, and it makes it so much more exciting. Of course, there are some obvious cuts, but there are also some invisible stitches as well, like this moment here. For the stunt that comes next, they needed this to be in 2 shots so that they could set all the safety needs of that car gag. So they combined 2 takes here by using a mask at the edge of the car here that wipes between. And now you know, and you can't unsee it. But before pointing it out to you, it's invisible, just another movie magic trick. But the specific moment I want to look at is right here, this tavern scene. And before I do, as always with this sort of episode, I think it's important to note up front that this is my subjective takeaway from the completed scene. As a filmmaker, this is how I break down and analyze films, not to try and figure out why the director did a thing or their actual intention, but instead what worked for me and what my takeaway was. This is a great way to get you thinking about your own work, how you see the world, and what works and doesn't for you on a personal level. But getting in, what I love about this scene are the hills and valleys, all the little nuances. First, we're coming from high tension, high volume, and we slam down to this very quiet setting. And here's the shot that brings us into the scene. It establishes the tavern, lets us know where we're gonna be, and helps sell the interior, since my guess is that the interior was shot on a stage. This background here feels like blue screen to me. And I like what they do here with the sound. It's a very subtle dropping of intensity. We have a high point of sound in the shot with the characters close to the camera. We hear the creature in the background. But as they near the tavern and the end of the shot, the sound drops down a bit, giving us space to have a solid impact on this cut with the loud door opening. I'm a big fan of the Foley work here too. All Foley work in this scene is so satisfying, which if you don't know, Foley are the sounds that you hear which are performed by Foley artists on a stage while watching playback. So these footsteps, the chair moves, clothes moves, and so on. And we could split things up to hear it a little better using the DME Paramount sent over, which DME stands for dialogue, music, and effects. So we have those 3 channels broken out to hear what's happening a bit more. But we have this burst of sound that brings us down to a whisper, and it's in playing those silent moments that I feel builds the tension so well. If you look at the waveform here in the scene, you can see what I mean. We have them entering the tavern here, silent tension building, the creature arriving outside, another growl as it's at the window, then a full dropout before hitting in with the phone and chaos. And the phone is a great element to point out here. Of course, every character in that tavern likely has a phone on them, so it wouldn't have been completely odd to get a phone ringing without a setup, but Krasinski took the time to set that up and give emotion to that setup. We find humanity with the girl whose phone it is, and even in that setup, Krasinski uses it as a character beat for Regan. Amongst the terrifying moment, Regan's courage and leadership quality shows through as she gives a comforting smile to someone who is clearly terrified. So the setup wasn't just this loose moment either. It's wrapped in emotion and character, using every second to push story, character, and theme, and that's just awesome. But moving back to the sound, I love the tempo of the sound they create in this film. That's, of course, a dance between the sound department and the edit, but the pace and the setup of sound before a big moment works so well. For instance, let's look here. You have sort of this 1, 2, 3 boom effect. The phone, the creature, Lee and Reagan bracing, and boom, the creature explodes in. And we can look at how the cadence helps the moment by cutting out just one shot. It still works, but for me, we're losing some of that tension impact. It feels more action driven now, and we have a similar moment at the end of the next scene we're gonna look at. You have a very similar tempo here. 1, 2, 3, boom. 1, the sliding back of the shotgun. 2, it's sliding forward. 3, the creature, and boom, the shot. And of course, I'm not saying it has to be that count or that they do that a ton in this film. It happens a couple times, but there's plenty of moments where it has a totally different tempo. The idea is the lead up to the moment or not. An abrupt action might be the best thing for a good shock. It's all in discovering the right pacing for the moment. Overall, the construction of the tavern scene is awesomely minimal too. Like Spielberg or Hitchcock, Krasinski lets moments play, and I love that style since for me, it plants you in the scene more. But let's move to the second scene where there's some similar elements. Again, they're using sound in really simple and effective ways. As the characters are running, the music could be full-on action cue, but instead it's a little more pulled back at first, almost a heartbeat vibe. And it lets us hear their feet hitting the ground, their labored breath. It also gives room to cut to these POV shots, hear the breathing of whoever has the gun trained on them. And again, we could take a look at those elements separately to get a sense of how the sound is bringing life to this moment. And as we listen to the effects channel only, you hear all the elements that were brought in to breathe life to the scene, including the cicadas that you don't even notice when everything's together, but you would absolutely feel their absence if they weren't in. Those little touches the sound department adds makes it all feel lived in and real. So if you're ever cutting a scene and it feels hollow, it could be that you haven't thought about what your world should sound like. But holding the music back a bit during this action beat also gives room to allow the music to rise, giving a sense of that tension rising, the danger getting closer, and has that great smash to silence with this brutal moment. And once again, to see how these elements build and orchestrate together, let's look at the DME. Another thing I love that Krasinski plays with here is perspective. We move from being with them on the ground in their perspective of this moment to a spectator, looking at them through unknown eyes. It does a great job of adding mystery, but it also shows us that this person could have shot them, but didn't. They're watching this family together, and not only that, sees firsthand what they can do. It's a great directing choice for how to play this scene while setting up for what comes next. Without the POV putting us in the head of this unknown person, what comes next with Cillian Murphy would have felt lifeless and way out of left field. Now, I picked those two moments to talk about specifically because they don't really spoil anything for the movie, but also because they're so simple and effective. There aren't a ton of moving parts or flying cameras, just really smart techniques that help the intention of the filmmaker land. All the while, never losing sight of character. Regan is more like her dad, and we see that in the small moment in the tavern when she puts her own fear aside to comfort someone else. And in the beginning, Regan decides to go off with her father and connect with him, while Marcus goes off with his mother, who he's more like. We get those similar moments and connections in the beginning with Marcus and his mother, and I also love this moment as well. Marcus goes through something very similar to what his mother did in the first film. It's even the exact same foot. Krasinski has said in interviews that this is a film about parenting to him, and he is constantly reinforcing that in so many ways, even across two films. This horrible thing happens to Marcus, and his mother is there to comfort him through this bit of pain that she has been through herself. For me, it's that attention to detail, that care for character and theme that takes a fun sci-fi thriller like this and makes it memorable. And of course, I didn't go incredibly in depth here, but it's this sort of process, picking apart every moment, that really frames everything differently, like taking apart a watch to see how it ticks. And that's an incredibly valuable practice as a filmmaker. And like I said before, Quiet Place 2 is out right now. It's crazy fun and has great special features, so jump to the links below to find where you can grab it. And until next time, don't forget to write, shoot, edit, repeat.